with debate, I recognize the member from Timiskaming, Cochrane.
Thank you, Speaker. And just to start off, I will be sharing my time with the member from Algoma, Manitoulin. And once again, it's an opportunity and an honour to be able to rise in this House and specifically to speak about Bill 100, the Trails Act. And just at the start, I had an opportunity to speak on second reading, and I'd like to repeat part of it again, that just for clarity, I'm a proud snowmobiler and I'm a member of the Tri-Town Snow Travelers, and I'm also a property owner, and another snowmobile club, Club Echo from Earlton, has had the right to use my property for the last, I believe, 30 years. And I'm hoping, I am confident that that will continue. And when we made our first, in my first 20 minutes on this bill, I concentrated on the snowmobile part of this that affects snowmobilers, and I'm going to do that again in third reading. It's very important to my riding, and not just to my riding, but to Northern Ontario, and not just Northern Ontario, but to the province as a whole, because the snowmobile trail system is not only a great source of enjoyment for many people, but it's also a very big economic driver. So when I spoke the first time in second reading in this bill, and the way, just for anyone who's interested, first reading is kind of a formality. Second reading, we get those of our members who want to speak to it, unless the government decides to time allocate, but most time people get to speak to it. Then it goes to committee where the public gets to speak to it. Then it goes through an amendment process, and some amendments are accepted and some are rejected. And then it comes back for third reading and passage. So in my first kick at the can, I identified 3 issues with this bill, and the other speakers here have done a pretty good job of saying the big issue is if property owners lose faith, they will take away the right to use their property. And one of the issues that property owners had with this bill is there is a section in this bill that allows an easement to be granted to a club. And there's a reason for that, and I gave an example. If a club wants to put a bridge onto an obstacle, and they need to put a bridge over that obstacle, and it's on private land, right now it's with a handshake. So this bridge could cost $200,000, and a year from now the property owner could say, no, you're no longer allowed to my land, so the investment in that bridge could be gone. That's why a club would want an easement. And if that was a case of my property, I think it would be a valid proposition to put an easement. But what many property owners were concerned, as were we, that the easement it had to be very plain in this bill, because actually the intent of the bill hasn't changed on that issue. But the language has, due to our work and the official opposition and the government working with us, the minister working with us, his staff. So it's much clearer in the bill now that an easement is a voluntary process initiated by the property owner. So if the property owner does not want to grant an easement, it won't be granted. And that's a crucial part, a crucial change in this bill. I'm not going to go through which amendment is which, but that for property owners in my part of the world, like myself, and across the province, you know, it's not, the easement process is a voluntary process. So I am going to continue to grant the Club Echo the use of my property. I am not going to grant them an easement. I am going to grant them the right to use my property on a seasonal basis. And that is not an easement. And that will still give me the ultimate control, and my fellow property owners, the ultimate control of that property. That's an improvement. Another issue that we put forward, and that I put forward in my first kick at the can at second reading, was that the main issues in this bill were with people in rural Ontario, specifically Northern Ontario, and that this bill should be at least traveled to Northern Ontario so actually people, property owners from throughout the province could participate in the process. That wasn't done. You know, the hearings were held here. That wasn't done. It was a bit. I'm not one who tends to overblow things. That, quite frankly, was a slap in the face to property owners. It was clearly identified. on our side, the third party, the NDP, we weren't asking for months of hearings to delay this, because this is very important to us. We do not want the trail system to fail. But the government thought otherwise. So the hearings were only in Toronto. I attended part of the hearings, and I would like to put on the record that the Ontario Federation of Snowmobile Clubs made a very good presentation. And they understood what the issue is. The issue isn't about stakeholder groups, as the Federation of Snowmobile Clubs are, as the Ontario Trails Council are, even as the landowners are. The issue is with individual property owners. That's the issue. And those are the people who haven't really been consulted. And those people are actually the people who allow the use, as I do, I allow the use of my land for no financial benefit at all. Actually, it's a financial loss, because on farmland, when there's a snowmobile trail, the yield is less, much less. So we do it for the good of the community. So the fact that we weren't, and I say we as the collective we, because I think I was fairly well consulted because I'm the MPP. So but my fellow property owners don't feel that well consulted. The third issue that hasn't been addressed in this bill, and I've listened to this afternoon, and I don't think it has been addressed really very well. The third issue in this bill is for those property owners who, out of the good of their heart, do grant an easement. And within this bill, if you grant an easement to one group, unless you make sure that it's stipulated by, and you know what, for this bill, if you grant an easement, before you do that, you better consult a lawyer. Because this bill does not protect property owners who grant an easement. Because the default position in this bill is if, and I'll use my example as the bridge, if I grant an easement for the bridge to this federation, to clubs or any club, and I don't specifically put in a covenant that this easement is not to be transferred, it's fully transferable. So the default position of this bill is to allow the transfer of easements to other groups. And quite frankly, I find that abhorrent. Because the person who actually, the property owner who actually grants the easement is not protected unless he or she gets a very good lawyer. And I brought that up in the first reading. In the second reading, that this was it's a no-go for me. It still is. I'm going to support this bill. Because I think there's some good changes being made. But I want to make it very clear for those people who are going to grant an easement, the default position is not in favor of the property owner. And that is a huge, huge problem. And I'll read one of our and people say, oh no, it's easy to understand. I'll read an amendment. We put forward an amendment for greater certainty. Nothing in this section shall be interpreted so as to give an eligible body the right or power to reserve or create an easement on an owner's land except in accordance with subsection 3 or 4. What that amendment was for is to clarify in people's mind that just like I do, I grant a yearly use permit, that even if I do that for 20 years, it slowly doesn't morph into some kind of easement. That's what we put that in for. The Liberal members voted against it, and their argument was the amendment would restrict the ability of one eligible body to assign an easement to another eligible body. Even the Liberal members in that committee did not understand this bill. So
That's surprising.
I beg people to understand, if you are going to enter into an easement with any club, and there are cases where it's perfectly legitimate thing to do, but it's going to cost you the money for a lawyer, and it better be a good one, because some of those covenants, you have the ability now to put covenants in, which is a good thing. but they're not going to go in by themselves. So the covenants that, at minimum, that should be put in, if you decide to grant an easement as a property owner, is A, that the easement should not be transferable, and it should be very clear who can go on that trail with the easement, and how long. And I'm sure there's other ones. But if you just grant an open-ended easement, because, and in my case, with the Federation of Snowmobile Clubs, my local club, I have a very good relationship with the club. And you know what? If in my personal case, I wouldn't have a problem working together with my snowmobile club. If they needed an easement on one of my properties, I wouldn't have a problem. But I know that you need to get your own legal opinion because that legal to be protected, because in 10 years you might not be dealing with the same people, and whoever you deal with might not be the same. You might not be as happy, and that's very, very important, and that's a real problem with this bill, that the default position with the easement is for the trail organization. It's not for the property owner. That, in my opinion, is inexcusable, and that's why I'm really focusing on this issue. Yes, I support this act. I fully support the snowmobile system, and there's a lot of improvements for the snowmobile system, but the fact that if you are one of those people who actually goes out of your way to grant an easement, and that you could be punished in the future by doing so if you don't take the proper legal precautions. Because like I said in second reading, the government has lots of lawyers, the trail company, trail organizations have lots of lawyers, and somehow the government's lawyers missed this or didn't understand it, because the government has lawyers advising, lots of legal representation, advising the members, on the committees, and obviously the member in this committee did not understand what was being proposed, because her debate made no sense at all.
You get what you pay for.
That's a problem. So again, the act is much clearer on whether an easement is voluntary or not. It's voluntary. That's a good thing. They didn't have hearings in the places where it really mattered, with the people who really mattered. That's a problem, because there are still people out there who have never been consulted, who have never really heard about what this is, and they're going to read an article in the paper, and they very well could pull no longer allow the use of their property based on a rumor. And that's tragic, because the trail system is very important. And that's tragic. And that could be because the government never bothered to actually go to places where trails are a lifeline, a lifeblood. And even if and like I said, OFSC came here and they did a great job. There was a couple others, and I'm not going to name them, but I was sitting at those hearings, and you know what? The OFSC did a great job, and I was happy that I was an OFSC member, and I was fairly confident, because I allowed them the use of my land. But the next person who came to testify, I thought, boy, he comes to my farm, I'm closing the trail the next day or the same day. But the way this act is set up now, if the trail group transfers their easement, I could very well get the other guy. That is a huge risk. So if I can leave the people of my area, overall Bill 100 is good. It lessens your liability. It doesn't take away the power of your land, but it has a huge caveat. And that is, if you decide to grant any type of easement, be very, very careful. Be very, very afraid. And if you're going to be very afraid, you know what you do? You protect yourself. And if it makes sense, if the easement makes sense, because there will be people who will want to do this, and I can think of examples in my writing where it makes perfect sense. Be very, very careful, and make sure that you are protected. because the only one in this, usually a bill, a law, in my opinion, a balanced law, everyone should be equally protected. And with this, with the section that allows you to grant an easement, once you decide to grant an easement, the default position goes to the trail organization. It doesn't go to you. You're not equally protected. You will have to make sure that you pay for a lawyer, and it better be a good one, and that he or she makes sure that there's covenants in that easement that protects the property owner, because they are not in there as part of the bill. Thank you.